If you're a kid today that are growing up on products like video game rather than like short form video, how are you going to use the internet, right? And what are the products that can get interested? So I would say those are kind of the things that we try to think a lot about in terms of trends that's contrarian.
And so it is important to not be too distracted early and try to do too many things at once. You need to make sure that you actually have something that people really care about.
Do you look for certain specific characters or traits when you look at founders? What makes great founders, you think? Is it different in gaming industry?
One universal trait that we look for is have they earned the secret to build what they're building? So case of Riot, Brandon and Mark were really hardcore Dota players, which is the game was a free mod that eventually became League of Legends. They had that user instinct. They were basically building a product for themselves because they knew exactly what type of game would need to get built to be able to satisfy like what they were looking for. So I think for founders, like to Jason's earlier point, like when they first build the initial product, their initial audience, who they're targeting, we think a lot about have they spent enough time through like the idea maze to be able to figure out. So we actually like founders that have thought just a lot deeper. And that's why like we don't typically like investing in things where it's like a very hot tech trend or the founder has like great resume. On paper, they should be able to go build this. But we've actually found like founders that have genuinely spent thousands of hours thinking about like a very specific pain point. There is like that really strong fit and also very like clear storytelling around why this thing needs to exist, why it's going to become an interesting venture fundable company. At least that's like one thing that I would say, we spend a lot of time on thinking about.
Yeah, I think we like founders that are an expert in something that matters for what they're building, but they don't have to know everything. And I think in the ones that we found were the strongest kind of fit within our portfolio and where we were the most helpful is that they also were very aware of things that they weren't good at or they didn't know about. And if that actually overlapped strongly with our background and our network on the Patron front, then it is a very kind of unique fit for that. And I think we have seen a couple cases where the founders that we backed didn't come from the game space, but they were deep experts in the area that they're building. And we really helped offset and help them turn the weakness around gaming know-how and network into a strength by connecting them with specific people from our world.
I mean, it's like the PayPal story, right? I think the original PayPal founders would say if they came from personal finance or like the finance world, PayPal would have not existed. So we actually like founders that actually don't even come from games, but are bringing like a fresh perspective and they're willing to like challenge the status quo. Like Brandon and Mark at Riot, they were just like 1 or 2 years out of USC. It's not like they worked at Blizzard or EA or any of these great companies, but they brought like a new perspective towards like building game studios and all that. These are the things that I think excite us as investors.
How many percentage of your previous investments are from the United States?
I think First Fund is like 3/4 of our investments are based in the US and 1/4 were outside the US. So we had 2 in Korea, 1 in Brazil, and 1 in Europe. We're not kind of focused on having a specific split between different geos. It's just more where our founder networks are strongest and where we're spending time. So I suspect that majority of Fund 2 companies will probably be based in the US, but we are spending a lot more time in Korea than some of the other international markets.
Do you think Korean gaming industry or Korean game founders have specific roles, or Korean gaming market has specific roles? For example, as a test bed, or maybe they're strong in certain genre. Do they have special or specific position?
Korea is interesting because you've had these really big companies like Nexon, NCSoft, Netmarble, like the last 20 years get created, but also there hasn't been a lot of breakouts too. So there's a lot of good game development talent, and also obviously it's a huge gaming territory. So I think to Jason's point, like we do think it's a potential interesting place to see it as like a crystal ball. We do have one portfolio company actually from Fund 1. It's called Anycraft, and they're trying to build blockchain games. But the blockchain games aren't about like trying to sell NFTs or make a lot of money and like gamble and all that. They're actually trying to build a game where modders and creators can actually get paid using crypto rails. So it's like a very much like more of a long-term company. So we probably prefer companies in Korea that are also trying to go broad, not just specifically targeting Korean market, because I think our sweet spot as a fund is actually for Korean founders, by the way, is like Korean founders that have a lot of ambition to want to even like move to Silicon Valley and start their headquarters here and think about like building a global business. They can also be based in Korea too, but I think that's the thing that we look for is like, do they have the ambition to like really try to build a potentially a public company in the United States, right? And I think you're going to see a lot more of that because you've seen great founders come out of Korea the last 10 years. Those are the things that we're trying to actively back.
That's the exactly same question and the challenge to the Korean founders.
they look around the chances to go abroad and go to the global market. But every founder thought about, should I have to go from day one to the global or make our product and the company very strong in South Korea? And after then, should I have to go to the global? What do you think about that?
I think in general, it's very hard to just become a global company right away. You have to start off with some kind of core audience, demonstrate that you really understand like how they want to engage with the product. Once you have that, trying to think about how that applies to users in other markets is something that we've spent a lot of time working on from the time at Riot, and even Amber, our third partner, helped Discord expand into other international markets as well. So that's something that we can definitely help founders with, but I do think it's important to demonstrate that there is strong product market fit within one or a few number of markets first before trying to go too broadly. At least how people interact around products, how they learn about them, how they talk about them can be very different from market to market. And so it is important to not be too distracted early and try to do too many things at once. You need to make sure that you actually have something that people really care about.
Especially in Korean market, the gaming startups founders think that's some kind of movie, like one-time hit entertainment, earn much of money, and it's it. So in Korea traditional investment thesis, we approach that kind of gaming startups investment as like a portfolio game. In South Korea, there's nobody who investment in the single game. They make some special fund and invest to some super famous producers. Is that looks similar in US too?
So historically, that's been the case. So before I joined Andreessen, I actually worked for a French gaming company called Ubisoft. So we made like Assassin's Creed and Rainbow Six. I was actually a producer there, but I was an external producer. So my job was to help like greenlight projects. So it's like what you're describing, which is like, it was kind of like the Hollywood model, right? They would bring the game design document, we would review it, then we would give them basically milestones to like build the game. But it was a publishing deal. It wasn't an investment deal. So the expectation is like, you take this money, the game is successful, then like we would share the royalties and everyone would make some money. But it wasn't like they were trying to build a really big company. So I think in the US, like venture capital has been really interested in trying to find the next Riot, Supercell, and the next Roblox. Generally speaking, like what matters more to us is like timing for those opportunities. So our perspective is as VCs, like our job is to see the present very clearly, not to predict the future, right? And if you think about a lot of these companies, if you're trying to create Riot today, it would be impossible because there is no distribution edge anymore. There's a lot of competition now for free to play. Riot worked because they were doing something that was very contrarian at the time. So in Riot, you know, when Jason joined the company, like a lot of people at the time were building free to play games on mobile. So they were all competing with Zynga. You know, trying to compete with like Candy Crush or something. They were trying to build games that would cost, you know, a lot of money, 10 gigabyte download. That's like PC, like that was kind of insane to do at the time. And now obviously when you look back, that was like the right kind of play. But that's how we think about game studios is like, what can you build today that the incumbents can't directly compete with you? That's like super important for us. Because if you're building something that Riot or Tencent or any like NCSoft, any of these companies can already do themselves, like you don't really have an edge as a startup. So to answer your question, I think a lot of VCs, that's where they get wrong when they invest in games is they don't think about why is there market creation potential. They just try to look for a good game. But by that definition, I think it's really hard. You might get lucky and, you know, maybe you'll find a very successful AAA game, but I generally think that's a very hard way to invest if you're looking into games as an investable category.
Even before this recent wave of venture investing games, like the biggest investors in games have always been game companies themselves. And so whether it's like funded by Sony for platform exclusive, by Microsoft, etc., they also acquired a bunch of studios. And I think this idea that like game publishers and taking more of like a movie style approach, almost like a indie games, equating them to like movies where you'll have teams that launch a product. The goal is not to have people play it for thousands of hours. The goal is to have somebody play the game for 50 hours and you charge upfront for people to play that. I think you've seen a couple examples where games have been very successful on Steam, like launching and people play them for some period of time, but they're not expected to be like League of Legends where you play it for 10 plus years. On the VC side, there's been more focus on trying to find these like forever games as a service that you can just continually update and people will play forever. But I think that's very hard to do because there aren't many examples of that in general that exist.
One of my very curious question is, what do you think about the AI? Outside of the San Francisco or Silicon Valley's startups have a very fear about it because everything is from here and we have no any information what's doing here and how the kinds of innovation will attack my startups.
So what do you think about new technologies?
Yeah, we like it, especially because we look a lot into consumer. Historically, it's been really hard to build consumer applications. I think because incumbents are so good. TikTok and short form video is so good that it's really hard to compete against it. You know, we talked about this, but the business model of consumer internet has always been like get to 1 billion people, create ads, just have like massive scale. I think we like it because it's precisely what you're describing, which is now it's creating disruption and you can actually go create new types of business models, new types of experience, new types of consumer behavior. For startups that are building around the space, I think it's hard because there's so much uncertainty and chaos. But I think from that, you can actually build something interesting. It's a space that I think most big companies are going to not approach it the way that startups would. And therefore, it creates an opportunity for companies to build interesting businesses and products.
You guys invested a lot in Web3 sector with your Fund 1. Where does your faith towards Web3 gaming sector comes from?
Yeah, our Fund 1 actually had maybe 20% crypto companies today in terms of how much we invested, 20 to 25 companies, 20 to 25%. So it actually wasn't the majority of the fund. I think a lot of our perspective and why we're still continuing to be excited by the space is it is one area that I think is more blue ocean than other places. It's one, a place that a lot of VCs aren't looking into. And then two, I think if you're a founder today starting a Web3 company, you're more likely than not to have very high conviction that this is what you are going to do. You can actually build something interesting. So we also like that versus like Web3 maybe like 3 years ago. Like we actually slowed down a lot of investing in 2021 around crypto because one, valuations were getting really crazy and every company was a Web3 company, right? I think personally where my conviction in crypto comes from is I got to sit in on the original Coinbase investment, see that company grow, and Chris Dixon was actually one of my mentors, and you know obviously he's a huge proponent of crypto and the blockchain space. I just think it's like one of the most fascinating technologies. If you ask anybody 10 years from now, like, would you expect crypto to be what it is today? Like most people would probably say no, right? So I think it's just one of these things that it's going to continue to grow. I think the question is timing. You know, what are the companies that are actually going to create value in the short term?
Yeah, and I think for us, like, it was never about like finding the best Web3 company or like our Web3 companies in our thesis. Just like you could make the same argument this past year where there's a lot of consumer AI, generative AI, like startups getting funded. Like our aim is not to invest in that technology. It's more, can we actually find the right teams who are using technology for the right reasons to actually build a product that people want and that people care about, where the technology actually makes the product better. It's not like the product has that technology and so they draw a certain type of user. And so if I look back at the companies in our Fund 1 portfolio that are still building on crypto, it's ones where they have a strong belief that it actually makes the product better and it actually changes like how people's experience with the product is. And so that's something that we'll continue to dig into.
As a gaming startup, what would be the effective ways to compete against incumbents?
I think you have to build in a space that they're not interested in or they're underestimating in terms of potential. So as talked about, like perhaps that's VR and AR, right? If there's a team that's building in that space. To back up also, like I think you also just can't build products or the technology for the sake of technology. There needs to be actual user demand and like player pattern or market creation. Kids today that are growing up with like skins and virtual items and assets, you don't even have to explain to them like why those things are valuable, right? And if you think about what does blockchain do that's actually unique is like give people property rights and like ownership in the digital world. Now, I think timing wise also that's like very far away and there needs to be kind of steps to get there. But that's another example of an area that I think is very underserved because a lot of game developers won't touch it. And I think there just hasn't also been a good game that people would actually want to play, you know, try to speculate or make a lot of money on. So that's like another, area that we spend a lot of time in. And I think, again, like the core thesis, like what are the next generation consumer companies? I think a lot of consumer investors are not necessarily looking at it with the lens that we're looking at. They're still very much focused on tech trends like, oh, what's really hot with generative AI. But we want to go like a layer deeper and think about if you're a kid today that are growing up on products like video game rather than like short form video, how are you going to use the internet, right? And what are the products that can get interested? So I would say those are kind of the things that we try to think a lot about in terms of trends that's contrarian.
기본적으로는 뭐 K푸드 쪽도 비슷한 것 같은데 약간 때깔이 좋아요. 음악의 퀄리티라든지 이거는 일본 투자자들을 만나도 똑같이 인정을 하는 포인트긴 하더라고요.
그래서 우리가 일본 이기고 있다는 거죠.
이기고 있는 거죠.
저는 그거면 충분합니다.
사실은 성과도 꽤 좋나 보네요.
최근 기준으로 하면 일단 멀티플은 7배.
다음 라운드 투자자가 있을 가능성이 높다.
다음 라운드는 IPO라서
30년은 모르겠는데 일단 3년은 간다.
적어도 3년은 간다.